back were worse than we ever imagined.
Yeah.
And they wrote it all down. They sent emails. They did this unabashedly.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
we've got them red-handed.
Yeah. Yeah. But they're still claiming that they didn't do anything wrong.
Exactly. Well, they think they're on the moral high ground somehow.
Yeah.
That we really are. I don't know what they think we're doing, but it's not what we're really about.
The Bill Walton Show for August 9.
Okay.
Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Welcome to the Bill Walton Show. I'm Bill Walton. Well, we've all heard the phrase, I may disapprove of what you say, but I would defend to the death your right to say it. Well, we've just learned that the federal government does not agree with that. That there are many things that the Biden administration and maybe some of the predecessors think that they don't want us to think or say. And we've just seen what that's about in a recent victory in which court are we in?
In, the Western District of Louisiana.
The Western District of Louisiana, okay.
The federal court. Yeah.
And I've got Jenin Younes back again, wonderful Jenin Younes back from the New Civil Liberties Alliance, who's their litigation counsel, and she was the lead lawyer on a case called State of Missouri versus Joseph R. Biden Jr. And what the judge found was an incredible amount of censorship going on at the behest of the federal government and federal government agencies, pushing the social media companies to censor, ban, and otherwise stifle the speech of people that disagreed with its policies. Is that the gist?
That is the gist, yeah. So essentially what these government actors in various agencies, including the White House, the CDC, the FBI, an agency called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, what they were doing was using various tactics, pressure, threats, coercion, encouragement, in order to get the social media companies to censor people who expressed views that were different from the Biden administration's. And that's a First Amendment violation.
So who are your plaintiffs?
So NCLA represents private plaintiffs. Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff were epidemiologists and co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. Aaron Cariotti, who's a psychiatrist, was a professor at UC Irvine before he got fired for not getting the vaccine.
Oh, they fired him for
not getting the vaccine, yeah. And then a woman named Jill Hines, who runs a health freedom network in Louisiana, opposing mask and vaccine mandates. So the case was originally brought by the state attorneys general of Missouri and Louisiana, and NCLA joined on behalf of private plaintiffs.
And how long has this been in the works?
The lawsuit was initially filed on May 5th of 2022, so it's been a while.
Okay, but we had all the censorship going on from 2020.
Right.
Well, actually, it started before that with other issues.
It's a little complicated, yeah. So, but as far as we know, some of this has been going on since around the election time of 2020. And some of these agencies, I would say, were sort of acting rogue. So they weren't doing this because the Trump administration told them to. In fact, the evidence I've seen from the Trump White House, and I say this not as a Trump supporter, but they were actually, their communications with social media companies were totally different. They were saying things like, if you can promote authoritative information on COVID, that would be great, which is fine. They can do that. Once the Biden White House took over, it was, threats. If you don't censor this, we're going to come after you. We're considering our options. And then the social media companies complied. They changed their policies in order to censor more people and to basically do what the administration wanted.
Well, the judge is Terry Doughty.
That's right, yeah.
Doughty, and he's in Missouri. He's in Missouri.
No, he's in Louisiana.
Louisiana?
Yeah.
Well, the thing that was striking, and we were joking before, I said, come on, let's talk about this big victory. And I got a hold of the judgment, and the judgment's about 8 pages, and it's an astonishing list of the people who were defendants in this case. And then I looked at the memorandum attached to the judgment, and I started reading it, and I realized this is 49,000 words long.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not just that it's long, but it gets into every single agency. It gets
Yeah.
into the FBI. It gets into the CISA, which we had to talk about. State Department was involved. Every single agency was working with and commanding the social media companies. And it was every single social media company, including things like Wikipedia.
Yeah, that's right. I think one important thing to understand about the case is that this wasn't sort of one plot that was coordinated. It was different agencies acting independently and all, thinking this was okay. I think there was some communication between agencies and the White House, but I think mostly they were sort of doing their own thing. And so the the way in which they were influencing the social media companies took different forms. The White House was very using a lot of threats and pressure. We're going to look at how to change Section 230 in order to get them to do what they wanted. The CDC was more working hand in glove, so saying this is the kind of post you should be taking down. This is authoritative information. And I think one thing that shouldn't get lost in this is a lot of what the government was saying was wrong, was misinformation itself. So they were often, promoting bad information while demanding that good information be removed.
So the list of things that they were wrong on included masks, included social distancing, included the efficacy of the vaccine.
That's right. Yeah. Natural immunity.
Oh yeah, they said natural immunity was
Yeah.
was unimportant.
Yeah. The lab leak theory.
Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. I mean, the whole list of things that people were talking about back in the day in 2020, 2021,
Yeah.
and we weren't allowed a debate. They just
Right.
wanted to shut it down.
Right, exactly. And that's, I think this case kind of illustrates why we have a First Amendment, uh, because we need to be able to debate these things. COVID was a new disease. There was actually a lot that was unknown. And the government, instead of allowing the public to hear different opinions from different scientists and different people, you shouldn't have to be a scientist either to express your views, shut it down and basically said there's one view, it's the government's, it's that lockdowns are good, mandates are good. And if you say anything different, you're going to be silenced.
How did you? I want to get into the particulars with the agencies, but I was impressed by the amount of research that was done, the amount of testimony, the amount of text, the emails that were uncovered to build this case, because we're not just shooting from the hip here, and the judge wasn't shooting from the hip. He called it. He said if this is true, and I think he concluded it is true.
Yeah.
He said the present case arguably involves the most massive attack against free speech in the United States history.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've been saying that since the beginning since we brought this case, and actually since I brought a similar case before it. There has never been a situation in which the government could silence or suppress certain views in the amounts that it can with social media. I mean, in the 1970s, the government could call a newspaper and say, please don't print this story, or if you print this story, we're going to come after you. But that wasn't really the same as shutting down debate in the modern public square, which social media is these days.
Well, let's do an example. The Great Barrington Statement. What was it that Fauci came out and Francis Collins came out, who were then the top guys in the health establishment in Washington, and said this comes out, and your clients, who are probably a lot more famous than they are and a lot more accomplished than they are, said these guys are just quacks.
Yeah, so the Great Barrington Declaration was censored in 2020, and I think
First
early
explain what that
2021.
is.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff, epidemiologists at Stanford and Harvard, respectively, and then Sunetra Gupta, who's at Oxford, some of the top epidemiologists in the world, wrote a short treatise basically calling for an end to lockdown. This was at the beginning of October of 2020. An end to lockdown, saying that the harms outweighed the benefits, that it wasn't really going to work, and that the way to go about this was to protect vulnerable people, to use our resources to do that rather than shutting down society as a whole. This was, of course, disagreed with by people like Fauci and many of the establishment public health figures. And the declaration was immediately censored on social media. So it was hard to find it in Google searches. The Facebook page was taken down. And at the same time, there are emails between Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins of the NIH saying this, we've got to orchestrate a takedown of this declaration. Now, we don't at this time have direct evidence that they communicated with the social media companies and told them to take it down. I suspect such evidence exists, but I think there'll be a lot of efforts made to make sure that it doesn't come to light.
Well, but let's talk. He names the defendants by agency and by individuals, and the
Yes.
defendants include the White House, State Department, CISA, FBI, CDC, on and on and on. I mean,
Yeah.
there are like a dozen agencies that were the defendants and individuals within it. But we have the, I think Jim Jordan, and I don't know if it's part of this case. We've got all the emails. We've got all the
Right.
emails between the White House and what they were telling the social media companies to do, in particular Facebook.
Right.
I mean, they were basically ordering and they were really cranky. And they said to Facebook, look, if you don't do this, we're going to go after you on Section 230,
Right.
or we're going to go after you on antitrust. And Zuckerberg has been on record saying, look, if they come after us on antitrust, we've got a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they were using the most extreme form of coercion.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what I'm saying is there isn't specific evidence of Fauci.
Oh, you're
and
being so
Collins. Yeah.
lawyerly.
Sorry.
I forget.
But as a
You're being a careful lawyer.
As a general sense, that's absolutely what's going on. And you mentioned recently the Jim Jordan is chairman of the Select Subcommittee on Weaponization of the Federal Government, which is a subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee that's investigating this issue, and I served on briefly. And so through that, Congress has subpoena power that is sort of unparalleled in other aspects. You usually can't even obtain this stuff through litigation. So internal Meta documents, I think, revealed the most shocking information, where the companies were basically saying, and they weren't basically saying, they said, we're under pressure from the White House. We have to change our policies. And one of my favorites is one from Nick Clegg, who's the head of global affairs at Meta, to the vice.
He's their man in Washington.
Yeah.
He's Facebook's interface with everybody in Washington.
Yeah. And he's emailing with the vice president of public policy, and he asks him, why did we censor the lab leak theory, or why did we have it removed instead of demoted? And the vice president of public policy says, because we were under pressure from the White House, we shouldn't have done it. Now, the government has been arguing that the companies were doing this on their own and the government was just making suggestions, which is ludicrous when you read the emails. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of emails that are very coercive. But these internal emails kind of, in my opinion, eviscerate that argument, because the companies are saying internally, we're doing this because the White House is putting us under pressure.
Well, that's the way I read it.
Yeah, that's the way anyone would read it.
I don't have to argue it in court, but as just a normal person reading what they did, this was incredible coercion.
Yeah, yeah.
The Bill Walton Show. I'm here with my great guest and good friend Jenin Younes, who's the lawyer on a case that we just received a summary. What was the verdict was called?
It's a preliminary injunction.
Preliminary
Yeah.
injunction, Missouri versus Biden, which shows how the extent to which the federal government and the agencies were using social media to censor us. And the list of things that they were censoring, Jenin, is, we've been talking about COVID, but, I'm looking at some notes here. It was not just efficacy of masks and lockdowns and things like that, but they were censoring conversation they didn't agree with about the 2020 presidential election. Yeah. The security of voting by mail. You weren't allowed to post parody
Yep.
of federal government officials.
Yeah.
Humor was part of what they were trying to shut down. No negative posts about the economy.
Yep.
And no negative posts about Joe, President Biden.
Yeah.
So it was really anything that was in opposition to the Democrat regime, they were trying to censor.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's also the Hunter Biden laptop story is a big one. Which
Elaborate on that, because the FBI was in early on that one.
Yeah, that was mainly the FBI. So what the FBI did was, and this has sort of come out through the discovery here as well as the subcommittee's investigation, the FBI went to the social media companies and said, there's like a Russian hack and leak job coming. And also you guys should change your policies so that you censor hack and leak information, anything that's hack and leak. And also it's probably going to involve Hunter Biden's laptop. Meanwhile, we know from depositions and their emails that they knew that Hunter Biden's laptop was not Russian disinformation or the result of a hack and leak job, that it was real, like, so to speak. It existed and it was his. And so they were telling the companies this while they knew otherwise. And that was clearly an attempt to get them to censor the story. And the judge in this case found that they had coerced the companies by way of deception. So if the government is getting the companies to censor things by deceiving it about the nature of the material, that's coercion.
Well, it 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 was coercion, and for anybody watching, listening to the show, I strongly recommend taking on that 49,000. What did it work out to exactly? 49,716 word memorandum, which the judge wrote based on all the work that was done by everybody, and it's an incredible compilation of everything you've been reading about in the paper or hearing is in there.
Yeah.
And where do we find that? I mean, I had to dig around the internet. Do you have any?
You should be able to Google and find it if you Google Missouri versus Biden, Judge Doty. I have access to, court.
Okay. Anyway, it's not that hard to find.
Yeah.
I found it in a couple of minutes, but
Yeah.
you ought to take a read. It's well worth it. Let's talk about CISA.
Yeah.
I had Ben Weingarten on. He gave a testimony to one of
Yeah.
the I think it's the House committees on CISA,
Yeah.
the Cybersecurity Information
Infrastructure Security Agency.
Infrastructure Security Agency. Talk
Yeah.
about CISA.
Yeah, they're a subcomponent of DHS, or a sub-agency of DHS. So
Yeah.
they were initially charged with protecting the infrastructure, so bridges and stuff like that, as well as the internet. Like we don't want
Like regular infrastructure.
yeah. Oh, look, we don't. I mean, we also don't want a foreign government to be able to hack into our cybersecurity,
Okay.
cyber infrastructure, and get into bank records, whatever, that kind of thing. But what they started doing essentially was creeping into policing election so-called misinformation and then domestic speech.
They called that their election infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. And they were acknowledging that, well, we're really looking at domestic so-called misinformation, but this poses a threat, so we're going to do it anyway. And they were working with third parties. So this is an interesting aspect of the whole thing too. There were a number of third-party nonprofits who supposedly specialize in disinformation and misinformation, assessing it and figuring out what to do about it. And CISA and some of the other agencies would work with these third parties. They're known as the Virality Project, the Election Integrity Partnership. There are probably dozens at least. And they would sort of outsource the censorship to those companies, which is also, should be considered illegal.
Well, they had their group. They called it the Countering Foreign Influence Task Force, and they interpreted that as really anything in the country, including domestic terrorists, which includes Trump voters.
Right.
And so their scope went all the way from protecting bridges and tunnels, then to IT, then
Right.
to elections. But then Jen Easterly, who runs CISA, didn't she decide that we had something called our cognitive infrastructure?
Yes. Yeah.
And she was testifying. She said, "Well, this is something we got to protect." Let me see if I can get her exact quote here. But she says that the cognitive infrastructure is the American mind.
Wow.
And they
yes.
need to influence
control that.
what's in the American mind.
Yeah.
Her quote is, "We live in a world where people talk about alternative facts, post-truth, which I think is really, really dangerous if people get to pick their own facts."
Yeah. Well, you live in America where you get to pick your own.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I think one of the common threads I see.
Is she still on the job?
I believe, yeah,
Okay.
as far as I know, unless something changed in the last 2 weeks or
Right.
something. I mean, one of the common threads I see through a lot of these government bureaucrats and these agencies who are doing this is that they think that they have a handle on the truth, and that Americans are babies who need to be told what the truth is, and they can't be exposed to different points of view and make their own decisions. And that's exactly what the First Amendment was designed to protect against. It says that every American has the ability to decide for him or herself what's true, and to hear different opinions and to make up their own minds.
Well, it's sort of the basis of all our freedoms.
Exactly.
I mean, everything else, stems from that.
Exactly. Right.
Well, there was one where she teamed directly with the State Department's Global Engagement Center,
Yeah.
and they were again trying to flag emails and posts for parody and jokes.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. They wanted to target inaccurate information, and we talked about COVID and vaccines, et cetera, but also racial justice.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And they're going into, the transgender stuff. That's now considered, you can have transgender misinformation if you say that, biological men shouldn't be able to play on women's sports teams. They consider that misinformation.
Well, this is still happening. I had Jay Richards on a few weeks ago, and we we did a show on that topic.
Yeah.
And Facebook demonetizes.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not sure it was that show, but we think it was. And
Yeah.
then mysteriously they put it back up again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they didn't take it down. They just wouldn't let us run ads.
It's really incredible. A few week or two ago, YouTube censored NCLA and the Missouri former Solicitor General, who's sort of leading this case, and they were discussing the case, and YouTube took it down for medical misinformation.
They were talking about the case
Yeah.
that was in court,
Yeah.
part of the legal system,
Exactly.
assuming part of the public record.
Yes.
Then they took it down.
Yeah, and it was 3 lawyers. I don't think they were saying anything totally crazy.
Well, lawyers, you're all careful. And the ones that aren't careful, anyway, they're not long lawyers. But the list, you're also not allowed to talk about the withdrawal from Afghanistan
Yeah.
and leaving $87 billion of equipment in the desert.
Yeah. Well, and this is exactly why we don't have the government policing speech. They're showing us here, they're illustrating why they can't be trusted to do this. Because the idea that they're just taking down, it's so problematic, the idea that you can just remove false speech. I mean, you start with the sort of epistemological questions. What is false? And then who decides? And this is what the framers of the Constitution understood when they enacted the First Amendment. They understood that this is not, and it's much better that people be exposed to a variety of viewpoints, even if some of those are blatantly false or based on blatantly false information. People can decide for themselves and evaluate different arguments.
Well, I think one of the reasons I want to do shows like this, even though we now need to worry about YouTube, Facebook, and everybody else not letting it happen, is that the people in the government, we're in the D.C. area, and the people in government are just like us. I mean, they're just as flawed.
Yeah.
They've got similar backgrounds, similar educations, and all of a sudden they go into a government job, and they then become omnipotent.
Right.
In their mind.
Yes, exactly. That's what this whole philosophy assumes, that people who work in government are omnipotent and they have a handle on the truth that regular people don't have, which they've proven themselves isn't true. How many things have they gotten wrong throughout the pandemic, and not to mention many other subjects.
Now I want to veer into the personal a little bit. You used to be a pretty serious liberal.
Yeah, I with some caveats. I had a libertarian streak always.
Okay,
which
well
got
that's
me in
obvious.
trouble.
You still have that. But then what converted you?
Well, COVID was really the thing. I mean, I was sort of shocked that people thought it was okay for the government to tell you can't leave your home, or you have to go get a vaccine. I opposed the lockdowns early on. That just seemed completely wrong to me. And the more I looked at it, the more I began to realize that there's so much government overreach in so many aspects of our lives, and it's just not consistent with the Constitution or sort of the principles on which this country was founded.
What did you learn as you've developed this case? You started out with a skepticism, but what was there anything that shocked you that you learned that's in this case? And by the way, it's in the 49,472 words in the judge's memorandum.
So I've been really surprised at just how bad some of these government actors were. I thought that there might be some material like this behind the scenes, but I didn't. I couldn't have imagined sort of the scope of it or the degree of the coercion and threats and sort of the hubris that these government actors displayed. There's one in particular, a guy named Rob Flaherty, who is the digital media director in the White House. And he was constantly, as soon as the Biden administration took over in January of 21, he was writing to the companies and just haranguing them and saying, you better do what we want or else. And then they were saying, okay, 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 we'll change our policies. And the tone he used with them was just completely unacceptable. And the now we know from the Jim Jordan's emails, the emails Jim Jordan obtained, that the employees at the companies didn't like his tone, and they were saying, we don't really like the way he's treating us, but we gotta work with the White House, otherwise we can get in trouble.
Well, he told them, talking to Facebook, he said that he didn't like something that was in the Post or something about vaccine hesitancy, and he emailed them, "You're hiding the ball."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and he accused Facebook of being, was this Biden or he accused Facebook of being responsible for the Capitol riots.
Yeah, he basically said, you guys were responsible for the riots because you didn't censor information about that, and now you're doing the same thing with the vaccines. And it was a very threatening tone. We're not going to let you get away with this again, which is
Well, and again, if this is exactly why you can't let these people do this, because they can ruin your business. Section 230,
exactly.
antitrust. I mean, they hold the ultimate sword of Damocles over you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and Biden, by the summer of 2021, Biden was saying things like the social media companies are killing people. His communications director was saying that the White House was looking at Section 230 to see how the companies could be held accountable for not censoring vaccine misinformation. And then the company's internal emails show that they're saying, okay, we're really worried about this. We've got to change our policies. So I don't know how you can argue, even though the government is trying, how you can argue that the government wasn't responsible for this censorship.
Bill Walton Show. I'm here with Jenin Younes, and we're talking about Missouri versus Biden and the recent judge's pronouncement that the government was up to no good, and with lots of evidence to prove it. But I want to talk a little bit about maybe the other side. The government's argument is, well, these social media companies agreed with this, and they wanted to shut this speech down as well. And there's a lot of censorship that people feel on the internet, and we just blame Google or we just blame Zuckerberg, but we don't really think the government's necessarily involved. Isn't that the argument the government's making?
That is their argument, and it's an absurd argument.
Okay, why is it absurd?
Well,
let's go legal on this.
I mean, first of all, before this information came out from the Select Subcommittee a few weeks ago, we had quite a bit of evidence that people in the White House, especially, but also at other agencies, were threatening the companies and bullying them. Now, you wouldn't need to do that if they wanted to do this anyway. Now we have these internal emails where you have the companies saying, the employees exchanging emails saying, we don't really want to do this. We consider it a violation of, free speech principles, but the White House is putting us under a lot of pressure. We've got to do it. So I don't know how, they're going to be able to maintain that.
But if it's just the companies doing it, you can say, well, look, we're a private company. We don't like what you're saying. You don't have to use our platform. That's not a First Amendment violation. No. It's only when the government, you become an instrument of the government.
Exactly. There's something.
What's the legal? How does that work?
There's something called state action theory, which says that the government can't co-opt private industry to accomplish what it can't do directly. So
that's what's at stake. That's what's happening here.
Yeah. Okay. So an analogy I use a lot is the government. The government can't search your home without a warrant. The government also can't hire a private company to go search your home without a warrant in order to get around that prohibition. So the same thing should be seen to apply in the speech context. It's a sort of a new area of law because before social media, you didn't really have the government be able to co-opt private industry to censor people. I mean, there were cases where you had the government calling a newspaper and saying, please don't print this story, or don't print this story, or we're going to charge you with treason or something like that. But that it was a little bit different in that, the newspaper isn't responsible for serving as a platform for, millions of voices. So if the newspaper complied, that was one story that was censored. And, that was the Pentagon Papers case was said that they can't do that. But the effects of this are really tremendous because of the nature of social media.
The ruling, the government, of course, is appealing all this.
Yes.
And that's uniform. Are all the agencies all in? And how many? They have 53,000 lawyers involved in this.
DOJ is obviously
DOJ is
referenced.
running point. on it.
Yeah.
And there's going to be, it's now August 9th, and
Yeah.
there's going to be an oral argument tomorrow, August 10th.
Yeah, that's right. In the Fifth Circuit.
What happens in an oral argument, and where does this push this?
So it's before a 3-judge panel, which is how they usually are. And the judges typically ask questions of the attorneys. I imagine this will be what's called a hot bench, where the judges ask a lot of questions because it's a big case. In this case, they also expedited briefing, which indicates that they consider it to be an important case. So things are going to happen fast. I think we'll have a decision by the end of August. And then it's very, very likely to go to the Supreme Court. Now, during oral argument, you typically get a very good idea of what the judges are thinking. They kind of allow the public to know how they feel based on the way they ask the questions.
Well, what George Doherty found, and I think you've got to find this to make the case. I don't know what I don't know what he ordered them to do, but you have to find, I guess, number one, significant encouragement and coercion. And he found that.
Yeah. So he was saying there are basically a couple of means through which the government can sort of co-opt private industry. Now, if you coerce them, if you say, if you don't do this, if you don't do what we want, censor people, or else we're going to impose consequences that are going to cost you a lot of money, that's coercion. That's one way of doing it. Also, significant encouragement, so that I would say is a little bit less developed in the legal context. But I think significant encouragement should be considered a First Amendment violation. If the government is saying, hey, you guys should really be taking these posts down, it's dangerous, we're not going to do anything if you don't, well, maybe if they, I don't know, they explicitly say that, but we really think this is what you should be doing. Just be good citizens and do that. I think that should be considered a First Amendment violation. The government shouldn't be involved in, censorship at all.
But Flaherty said when he was after, I think it was YouTube, he said, your YouTube video was shared at the highest, and I mean the highest level in the White House. And he went on and on and on. And he said,
he said the concerns were shared.
The concerns were shared,
which was very coercive, because I was saying the president himself has
the president of the United States
yeah.
was telling them this was the problem. And then he repeated it again. He said, and just remember that I'm in the highest levels at the White House.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong. This was coercion. A lot of
don't
it.
be too lawyer-like.
No. I want to be clear. I think this was extremely coercive, and I think that's exactly what was going on here. But I don't even think the bar should be that high. I think the government also shouldn't be able to work with private industry, even if it's done voluntarily, in order to censor people based on viewpoint.
And then he also found irreparable harm.
That's right. Yeah. That's required for a preliminary injunction.
Okay, so he found both those to be the case. Now, when in the oral arguments, what's the federal government going to push back on?
They're going to argue that the companies wanted to do this.
Okay.
And they're also, and then another issue, which might be boring to most people, is another issue is standing, which is it's related, but
so there are three issues. The third one's standing.
Well, yeah, standing.
Yeah, I didn't clip that out. I thought it was boring.
It is. It's illegal. You have to show that you've been injured. And it's a very complex legal analysis. So in the First Amendment context, typically, if you can even show that the government's conduct is causing you to self-censor, like you're afraid of being removed from social media, so you don't say the things you would have, you don't need to show directly that your posts were removed because of the government, which would be very hard. Although some people can, like RFK Jr. can, because the government made specific demands that his posts be removed.
Well, he was part of the disinformation dozen.
Yeah.
Talk about the disinformation. I didn't. Somehow I missed it. I was thinking I didn't know about the disinformation. Evidently, there were 12 accounts that were responsible for 73% of what they called. Well, this is them.
Yeah.
There are 12 accounts, 73%. We can go after that disinformation dozen.
Yeah, so this was a group of people who didn't necessarily work together, but they had been identified by this nonprofit called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. And what they really do is they go around trying to shut up people they don't like.
Right.
They are not about any kind of hate speech or anything. So they had identified this group of people and claimed, basically, they just pulled some statistics out of thin air. They're responsible for 73% of the misinformation on COVID vaccines on the internet. If Facebook just gets rid of them, it'll solve all our problems.
But if I saw this and I started researching it, then that just shows you how this works, though. There must have been 50 articles on the disinformation
Yeah.
dozen. What was it, 2020, 21
Yeah.
when they started? That was all, and then really terrible,
Yeah.
the dirty dozen.
Exactly. And the White House and the Surgeon General just accepted these statistics without really very much basis. And the internal emails from Facebook show the people at the company were like, really didn't buy this. And they said, well, I don't know where they're getting these numbers from. This really isn't right. We think it's more like 0.05%. But this seemed like a good political target for the White House, I think. And so Biden and some of his staff sort of zeroed in on this as a focus. They got to get rid of the disinformation dozen. And what do you know? Right in the summer of 2021, when they were putting all this pressure on the companies to get rid of the disinformation dozen, even though the companies said initially they haven't been violating our policies, all of a sudden they all lost their accounts. So we know why
Well,
that
they
happened.
were once again going back to our buddy Flaherty. I guess in 2021, he said he didn't like that they weren't getting the dirty dozen, the
Yeah, the
disinformation dozen off
yeah, yeah,
fast
yep.
enough. He said, "Are you guys effing serious? I want an answer on what happened here, and I want it today."
Yeah, yeah.
So you get a call from the White House. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think I also want to make sure I mention they were also explicitly demanding Flaherty, a guy named Andy Slavitt, who was like the senior advisor to the COVID response or something, and the Surgeon General, and this is in internal emails. They were demanding that the companies remove true information if it would stoke vaccine hesitancy and true accounts. So if you and especially if it lacked context. So if you suffered a severe adverse effect after getting the vaccine and you wrote about it, if you didn't say, but this is only suffered by, 0.01% of people who get the vaccine, they would consider that, they call it malinformation. So true things that lack the appropriate
That's
context.
the most evil term.
Yeah.
There's disinformation, misinformation, and
Yeah.
malinformation. And malinformation, something can be true,
Mhm.
but they don't like the way you use the fact.
Exactly. So they were censoring true stories, true accounts, because it was not good for their agenda.
Well, so let's talk about this is the Bill Walton Show, and I'm here with Jenin Younes, and we're about to talk about Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci's named in this lawsuit.
Yes.
What was his role? How did he come up? I mean, I've got some notes here. I'd rather hear it from you.
Yeah. So he initially came into the picture in the sort of fall of 2020 because he was demanding censorship of the Great Barrington Declaration, which we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
And sort of anyone who disagreed with his lockdown strategy to mitigate the spread of COVID. Now, we know that he played a major role in trying to get the lab leak theory silenced, probably because he was responsible for funding gain-of-function research, which means ultimately he may have played a rather large role in the COVID pandemic in the first place.
They wrote a paper called The Proximal Origin of COVID-19.
Yep.
And that
Yeah.
was published in Nature magazine?
Yeah.
And it debunked anything that stated anything. It couldn't have occurred in a lab. It had to occur in nature.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, they were exchanging emails saying that they thought it was quite possible it came from a lab, but that wouldn't be very politically convenient for them. So
This is stunning.
it is stunning. Now,
And again, we felt this, we heard this, there were rumors, everybody's talking about this, but this has all been now pretty much documented.
yeah. Yep. And I mean, I'm going to speculate a little bit, even though I try not to. At this moment, we don't have direct evidence that Fauci asked the social media companies to censor the lab leak theory. But what we do have is emails from Facebook, internal emails, where they're saying, why did we censor the lab leak theory again? And another employee saying, because we were under pressure from the administration. We shouldn't have done it. So why would the administration have wanted to censor the lab leak theory? That's a question I've asked myself. This wasn't like the vaccines where, they were clearly, the Biden administration had made vaccinating as many people as possible central to his campaign and his agenda. Why the lab leak theory? I suspect it's because that's what Fauci wanted. I don't have evidence of that at this moment, but I'm hoping we can get
Gee, Fauci was using the money from his agency to fund the Wuhan lab
it. Right.
to do gain of function. And a lot of people believe that Fauci had an economic interest in some of the products that were being developed there.
Right.
I mean, why would he be concerned?
Exactly. Exactly.
And now he's retired. He's how old is he? 85.
Something like that.
These cases drag on forever.
Yeah.
The case may not be closed by the time he departs the mortal
Yeah.
coil. Who knows?
But
Anyway,
true.
and then he says he also testified he never contacted a social media company to ask them to remove information from their platforms.
Yes, he says that, but we don't know that.
Okay.
That's true. He's not the most honest person.
So why don't you sum up a little bit, because this is ongoing. The oral arguments are tomorrow. We're going to have to come back to talk about where it goes. Are we optimistic it's going to go through these judges? I mean, I know you got to be careful as a lawyer. I want you to be a careful lawyer. But it seems like a lot of this is so overwhelming that I don't know how you throw it out.
Yeah, I suppose, to play devil's advocate, my fear, and I don't think this is a proper interpretation of the First Amendment, but my fear is that the court will say it's too hard to police the government in this way. In order to have a First Amendment violation, you have to have a specific threat and a means to carry that out. So the government actor making the threat has to actually have the power to carry that threat out. These kind of general threats, I don't think that's a
so
correct.
If we had only one threat, we could deal with it. But here we're dealing with 53,000. It's just too much.
Yeah. And they were making specific threats, also, to be clear. Now the government says they didn't really have the ability to carry those things out, certainly not without Congress, etc. I don't think that's true. And I don't think that's the proper standard for assessing whether this is a First Amendment violation. But that would be my fear. That's the way I don't think that they're going to buy the government's argument that there was no pressure or that these were just suggestions. That's not how you can read these emails. So I am optimistic. The Fifth Circuit is sort of it's a reliable predictor.
They'll get to the right outcome.
Yeah, they tend to.
Well,
the Supreme Court tends to follow them pretty
Well,
closely.
I want to congratulate again on this brilliant work. And I know you've got a team and
we
other
do
people
have a team. There are
involved,
lots of very brilliant people on this.
But the New Civil Liberties Alliance has done amazing work here.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm a big supporter, and I think this was a big win. Let's hope we get through the oral pretty well, and this thing proceeds.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for discussing this with me.
Yeah, great to have you on. You'll be back, I hope.
For sure.
This has been the Bill Walton Show. I'm here with Jenin Younes of the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and we're talking about her exceptional case, Missouri versus Biden, which I think is something we've all been hoping would happen, and it's happening, and it's a good piece of news. Hope you'll join me on future shows. Hope you like this one. Please send us your comments on best place is probably Substack or thebillwaltonshow.com. And again, to plug something new we're doing, join us on Insider Access Live, which is a Zoom interactive Q&A show where I'm talking with guests live on Zoom rather, and we're going to be going back and forth with tough questions or maybe hopefully easy questions. So anyway, look forward to talking with you on that and others, and we'll be back with you soon. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Want more? Click the subscribe button or head over to thebillwaltonshow.com to choose from over 100 episodes. You can also learn more about our guest on our Interesting People page. And send us your comments. We read every one, and your thoughts help us guide the show. If it's easier for you to listen, check out our podcast page and subscribe there. In return, we'll keep you informed about what's true, what's right, and what's next. Thanks for joining.